Being dramatic, my husband told me, his voice flat, like he was commenting on traffic. My brother needs a place. It's temporary. You can use the guest room. His mother nodded from the kitchen doorway, already at home in my house. But 3 weeks later, when I walked out with everything that mattered, the word temporary took on a whole new meaning. I remember the exact moment I understood what was happening. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of grey morning that settles over Ottawa like a wet blanket and refuses to lift. I was at the kitchen table with my second coffee, reviewing a contract for a heritage property renovation project my firm had been chasing for 8 months. The deal would bring in just under $400,000. My phone was open beside me, calendar packed, and I was feeling, for the first time in a long while, like things were going exactly right. That's when my husband walked in with his brother. Not just his brother, his brother's girlfriend, 2 hockey bags, a guitar that had never been played outside of someone's living room, and an energy that said they had already decided this was happening before anyone thought to ask me. My husband. I'll call him by what he was to me then, my husband, though the word would sour quickly, set the bags down in the front hall of the house I had bought, renovated, and carried the mortgage on for 6 years. He poured himself a coffee. He didn't offer one to me. His brother gave me a grin that I had once found charming. "Hope it's cool," he said, "just for a bit." "How long is a bit?" I asked. My husband answered for him, "Until they get sorted, maybe a month." His brother's girlfriend was already walking toward the living room, looking at the built-in shelves I had commissioned from a local woodworker, running one finger along the grain like she was pricing it. I sat very still, the way I do when something important is happening, and I need my brain to catch up with my body. I am 41 years old. I have run my own architectural design firm for 9 years. I have survived a recession, a flood in my office building, and a client who sued me over a window placement. I know how to stay calm when something is wrong. "We should have talked about this first," I said. "I'm talking to you now," my husband said. There's a version of this story where I said something sharp and true right then and there. I wish I could tell you that's what happened. Instead, I picked up my coffee, walked to my office on the 2nd floor, and sat at my desk for 20 minutes staring at the contract without reading a word. That afternoon, my mother-in-law arrived with 2 casserole dishes and the casual ownership of someone who had been waiting for an invitation that was never quite extended. She set the casseroles in my fridge, moving my meal prep containers to the side shelf without asking, and told me she was glad the boys would finally have a home base. She called it a home base. My house. My mortgage. My base. I smiled and said nothing because I was still trying to understand the shape of what was being done to me. The guest room situation came the following week. My husband's brother and his girlfriend had been sleeping on the pull-out couch in the den, which meant the television was never available and the bathroom off the main hall always smelled like someone else's shampoo. My mother-in-law, who had taken to dropping by most mornings, suggested that the arrangement wasn't sustainable. "The den isn't really a bedroom," she said, as though this were a design flaw I had overlooked. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." "Your office upstairs has that daybed," she said. She said it the way people state obvious solutions to obvious problems, as though the only obstacle is that no one has noticed yet. I looked at her. Then I looked at my husband, who was standing at the counter opening a bag of chips at 10 in the morning. "My office," I said carefully, "is where I work." "You could work from the kitchen table," my husband said. "You do that sometimes anyway." He wasn't wrong. Sometimes I do work from the kitchen table, in the same way that sometimes I take the bus, which does not mean I should give up my car. I did not move out of my office. But I want to be honest. What I did instead wasn't much better. I got quieter. I rearranged my schedule to avoid the mornings when my mother-in-law was there. I started eating lunch at my desk and working later than I needed to, staying out of the common spaces that no longer felt common in any real sense, spaces that had been quietly redistricted without a vote. What I didn't do, not yet, was understand how organized this all was. That came later. It was a Thursday evening in November, about 3 weeks in. My husband was at a work dinner. His brother and girlfriend had gone to a hockey game with friends. The house was quiet for the first time since the bags arrived in the front hall, and I sat in the living room with a glass of wine and my laptop, catching up on emails. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that. I was looking for a PDF that my husband had forwarded me months earlier, a survey report for a property we had been thinking of buying together, a cottage north of Calabogie that we had viewed twice and never quite committed to. I remembered he had sent it from his personal email to our shared household account. I opened the account to search for it. The survey wasn't the first thing I found. The first thing I found was a thread between my husband and his mother, going back 5 months. 5 months before his brother showed up at my door. I'll give you the short version, because the long version took me 2 glasses of wine and most of the night to read, and the feeling it left in my chest isn't one I want to spend a lot of time in. They had planned it, carefully. His brother and girlfriend had lost their apartment in Toronto, a landlord situation, yes, but also 3 months of missed rent, and my mother-in-law had decided that the solution was my house in Ottawa. Her emails to my husband were practical and unsentimental. She has plenty of space. You're married. What's hers is yours. Just present it as a given and she'll adjust. My husband's replies were shorter but aligned. You're right. She's not going to love it, but she won't make a scene. She never does. She never does. I sat with that for a long time. Then I found the other thread, this one between my husband and his brother from 2 months back. They were discussing the cottage. Specifically, they were discussing whether, if my husband and I divorced, I would be entitled to a share of the cottage we hadn't bought yet, and how to structure any future purchase to limit my claim. His brother had written, "Just make sure nothing's in joint names. She makes the money, but that doesn't mean she should walk away with everything." My husband had replied, "Already thinking about it. Also need to check what she actually has. She's cagey about her business accounts." Cagey. The word my husband used for my financial privacy was cagey. I am meticulous about my business accounts because I have 9 employees and a fiduciary responsibility to every one of them. I keep my business finances separate because my accountant, my lawyer, and basic corporate law all told me to do exactly that. I am cagey, the way a surgeon is cagey about leaving the operating room to take a personal call. I forwarded everything to my personal email. I cleared the search history. I finished my wine. And then I did something I had never done in 12 years of running my own firm. I cancelled every meeting I had the following morning and called in a personal day. My first call was to my friend, the one who has known me since we were in architecture school together, who was there when I signed the papers on this house, who made me a card that said "You did it" when I landed my first major contract. I told her everything in about 20 minutes, which is roughly how long it took me to stop shaking. She said, "Tell me what you need." I said, "I need to know what I'm actually working with." She came over that afternoon with her laptop and a bottle of sparkling water, and we sat in my office. My office, still mine. I had not given it up, and we went through everything. Every asset, every account, every piece of documentation I had access to. The house was in my name, only my name. My husband had suggested this when we moved in because he was between jobs at the time and his credit wasn't strong enough to be on the application. I had agreed without thinking much of it. In the way you do things in a marriage, because you trust the other person, because you assume the architecture of your shared life is something you're both building. The mortgage was mine, the property was mine. Every renovation I had undertaken in 6 years, the kitchen, the main floor bathroom, the back deck, the landscaping, paid from my accounts, documented in my records, backed by receipts I kept in labelled folders the way my father had taught me to keep receipts. My second call was to my lawyer, not a friend who happens to be a lawyer, my actual lawyer, the one who had incorporated my business and updated my will and reviewed my partnership agreement. Her name was on a speed dial I had never been glad to have until that moment. She was direct the way good lawyers are. "The house is yours," she said. Full stop. A marriage doesn't automatically create joint ownership of a solely held property. It would have to demonstrate significant financial contribution to make any claim, and from what you're telling me, that contribution has been minimal. "He pays a third of the utilities," I said. "Sometimes." "That's not a claim," she said. "That's a roommate arrangement." I almost laughed. Almost. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved quietly and precisely, the way I approach a complicated renovation. One thing at a time. No unnecessary noise. Eyes on the structural work. I called my bank. I reviewed every joint account and every account where my husband was listed as a beneficiary. I restructured what needed restructuring. I called my accountant and had a long conversation about my business assets that I should have had a year earlier, for reasons unrelated to any of this. I started documenting photographs of how the house looked before his brother arrived, timestamps on every communication, a note every time something of mine was moved, used, or treated as communal property without my agreement. The guitar, I discovered, had been placed in my office closet when I wasn't home, on top of my drafting materials. I moved it back to the den without saying anything. I took a photograph first. The dinner happened on a Friday in early December. My mother-in-law organized it. 14 people, my husband's colleagues from his office, a few of his friends I had always found loud, his aunt and her husband who had driven in from Kingston. My mother-in-law had gone through my kitchen and made a list of what she needed, which she texted to me with the subject line, "Groceries," as though I were the assistant in my own home. I bought the groceries. I want to be honest about that too. I was still in the phase where I was collecting information, not acting on it, and I made the calculation that disrupting the dinner would cost me more than it would cost them. I was not passive. I was strategic. There is a difference, though I know how it looks from the outside. I spent most of the dinner in the kitchen, not hiding. I checked on the food. I refilled the wine. I had conversations I barely remember. At one point, my husband's aunt found me by the sink and said, in a whispered voice that was not actually quiet, "Your sister-in-law mentioned you've been struggling with the new arrangement. That's so mature of you, making room for family." Sister-in-law, the girlfriend, who had been in my house for 3 weeks. "It's been an adjustment," I said. After dinner, my husband's brother cornered me by the back door while I was bringing in some recycling bins from the deck. He had been drinking since 4 o'clock, and his filter was entirely gone. "You should know," he said, leaning against my doorframe, "that I really appreciate this. And I think it's going to work out great for all of us, especially once the place is, more settled." "More settled how?" I asked. He shrugged. Once it feels more like a family home. Right now it's very—" He made a gesture with his wine glass that took in the whole kitchen, all the choices I had made, the tile and the fixtures and the open shelving I had agonized over. "Professional, like a showroom. Professional, like a showroom." My home, which I had designed with care and lived in for 6 years, felt like a showroom because it reflected my taste instead of his. "Interesting," I said. He kept going. He was at that stage of drunk where information just falls out of people. "Honestly, between you and me, I think this setup could be permanent. My mom's already talking about the guest room situation. If you move your office upstairs to the attic space, we'd have a proper bedroom on the 2nd floor. The attic. They had looked at my attic. "My husband mentioned that?" I asked. "My brother? Yeah, he brought it up a few weeks ago, before we even came here." He must have seen something in my face, because he straightened up slightly. "Look, it'll all work out. You'll see." He went back inside. I stood on my deck in the December cold for a few minutes, looking at the backyard I had planted, the garden beds I had put in the summer before last, the string lights along the fence that I had hung on a Saturday afternoon, when I thought my marriage was something worth decorating around. Then I went inside and sent my friend a single text, "Ready." She called back in 4 minutes. The next morning was a Saturday in mid-December. Ottawa in December is serious cold, the kind that means business, and I had arranged everything with that in mind. The moving company, a woman-owned firm I had used for a client relocation 2 years earlier, sent 4 people and a truck at 8 in the morning. I had given them a floor plan and a color-coded inventory list. Green for mine. There was almost nothing marked any other color. My husband was still asleep. His brother and girlfriend were at her parents' place for the weekend. My mother-in-law would not arrive until 10. The crew was fast and quiet and professional. They wrapped my furniture in moving blankets with the careful efficiency of people who have done this 10,000 times. The dining table went first. A solid walnut piece I had bought from a craftsman in Almonte, paid for with my first year-end bonus from my own firm. Then the bookshelves, which I had designed myself and had built by a carpenter in Hintonburg. Then the sofa, the chairs, the kitchen appliances I had selected. My coffee maker, a commercial-grade machine I had bought myself after signing my largest contract to date, went into a box with the kind of reverence it deserved. My husband appeared at the top of the stairs at 9:15, hair flattened on one side, wearing the look of someone whose brain is still 3 steps behind his eyes. He stood there for a moment, taking in the front hallway, which was occupied by 2 crew members carefully wrapping the mirror I had bought at an estate sale in the Glebe. "What's happening?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'm moving out," I said. "You suggested I'd be more comfortable somewhere else. I've taken your advice." "This isn't Vivienne." Vivienne was what he said, my name in his mouth, the first time he had said it with any particular weight in months, maybe longer. "Every item being removed was purchased by me," I said. "I have the receipts, I have the bank records, I have photographs of the house as it was before your brother arrived. My lawyer has copies of all of it." He came down the stairs. He looked younger than I expected him to, standing in the front hall in his socks on the hardwood I had refinished 2 summers ago. "We can talk about this." "We should talk about this." "We should have talked about it before your mother texted me a grocery list for a dinner party in my home," I said. "That window is closed." He tried several approaches over the next 2 hours. He was sorry. He was under pressure. His family had needed him. He hadn't realized how it had all looked from my side. He used the word reasonable 4 times, which told me everything I needed to know about what he thought reasonable meant in this context. I kept moving, not because I was cold, because I'd made a decision, and decisions, once made cleanly, deserved to be followed through. When the last box was loaded, I walked through every room one more time. The house echoed in the way spaces do when the things that made them feel inhabited are gone. The walls had marks where my art had hung. The kitchen looked exactly like what it was, a renovation I had funded and completed 3 years before anything went wrong. I came back to the front hall. My husband was sitting on the bottom stair. He looked up at me with an expression that I think was meant to be appealing and landed somewhere closer to bewildered. "Where are you going to go?" he asked. "Somewhere I'm not a guest in my own life," I said. I had already arranged it, a furnished short-term rental in Westboro while I looked for something permanent. The deposit had been paid a week earlier, quietly, the way I had done all of it. I handed him a document on the way out. My lawyer had prepared it, a formal notice that as the sole owner of the property, I was revoking permission for non-occupants to reside there, effective in 30 days. His brother and girlfriend would need to make other arrangements. As for my husband and what came next, that was what lawyers and time would sort out. He read it twice. Then he said, "My mother is going to lose her mind." "That's not my concern anymore," I said. I left him standing in the front hall of the house I had bought and paid for, and filled with the careful accumulation of a working life, now hollow and his to figure out. Robert, who manages the building I moved into temporarily and who had helped me carry 2 boxes up the elevator that afternoon, handed me my keys and said, Starting over's not easy, but you picked a good neighborhood. He was right. I had. My friend came over that first evening with takeout from a Lebanese place we both love, and we ate on the floor because I had no furniture yet in the new place, and she told me about a project her firm was considering in Montreal that she thought I might want to consult on, and we talked about it for 2 hours. Work. The good kind of problem solving, the kind where the problems have solutions and the solutions are yours to make. My phone rang continuously that first week. My husband, who had apparently discovered that contrition arrived most reliably after consequence. His mother, who had moved from confusion to outrage to something that sounded almost like negotiation. His brother, once, briefly, asking in a voice still slightly incredulous whether I might reconsider the 30-day notice. I did not reconsider. What I had not expected, and I want to be honest about this too, was the phone call from my husband's colleague's wife. A woman I had met at exactly 4 work functions, who called me on a Wednesday morning to say that she had been at the dinner party, that she had noticed things, and that she wanted me to know that her husband had been asking questions about my husband's behavior at the office since the story got out. Apparently the version my husband had been telling, that I had overreacted to a family situation and left impulsively, was not holding up well under examination, particularly among people who knew what my firm was and what I had built. "Your name is on 3 buildings in this city," she said. "That's not a woman who overreacts." I thanked her. I meant it. The full picture came together slowly, the way these things do. My husband's brother and girlfriend were gone within the 30 days. They found a basement apartment in Vanier, which is a fine neighborhood, but a long way from the life they had apparently imagined inheriting. My mother-in-law, according to my friend who still had mutual connections, had stopped mentioning the situation at her book club, which is the closest thing to a public admission that she had been wrong. My husband updated his social media profile to say, separated sometime in January. He had moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in the Bywood Market, which is a perfectly decent place to live and which he was paying for himself for the first time in years. I heard through the mutual connections that he had told people I had blindsided him, that word, as though 6 years of labor and planning and carrying the structure of a life qualified as a blindside when I finally stopped. The thing about building a house, and I do know something about this, professionally, is that the work that matters most is the work no one sees. The foundation, the framing, the load-bearing structures hidden behind the drywall. If you build it right, the building stands long after you've moved on. If the wrong people are living in it, that's a different problem, and not one the building is responsible for solving. I signed a lease on a condo in Sentrytown in February. South-facing, 10th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows. I designed the interior myself, which is perhaps a predictable thing for someone in my line of work to do, but which felt important in a way I don't entirely have words for. Every choice mine, every line considered. No committees, no negotiation, no explaining why I preferred this over that to someone who would sigh and go along with it and call it over, designed at a dinner party 8 months later. The Montreal project came through. I brought on a junior designer I had been wanting to hire for 2 years, which I had been hesitating to do for reasons I can see now, were entangled with keeping my life small enough not to upset a particular balance. The balance was gone. I hired her. The project is the best work I have done. My mother, who lives in Vancouver and who had met my husband a total of 6 times in 12 years, said on the phone in March, "I never told you this, but your father always said he had soft hands for someone who called himself ambitious." I laughed for the first time in months, really laughed. My husband sent a long email in the spring. He had been in therapy, he wrote. He was learning things about himself and his family system. He used the phrase enmesh dynamic, which he had clearly learned recently, and was deploying with the enthusiasm of someone who has just discovered a word for something they've been living inside. He wanted to talk. He thought we could find our way back to something. I read it twice, the same way he had read my lawyer's letter. Then I forwarded it to my actual lawyer and wrote 4 words beneath it: "Please add to file." What I felt reading it was not anger, not satisfaction, something quieter. The recognition that a story can end without a dramatic final scene, that sometimes the ending is just the moment you stop explaining yourself to people who were never actually listening. The last time I saw my mother-in-law was at a mutual acquaintance's retirement party in April. She was across the room. We made eye contact once. She looked away first. I went back to the food table and had another piece of the very good smoked salmon and talked to an engineer I had been meaning to connect with for months, and we ended up exchanging cards and later collaborated on a project that I am genuinely proud of. My office, the real one, in my condo, the room I designed for exactly this purpose, has a long desk along the south wall and a window that looks out over the downtown roofscape. All those overlapping lines of buildings that other people built and that I walk through every day thinking about structure, about what holds and what doesn't, and why. I didn't leave because I was pushed out. I want to be clear about that. I left because I finally understood that staying had been costing me something I hadn't noticed I was paying. And once you see that kind of cost clearly, in black and white, in forwarded emails and quietly erased browser histories, and the specific silence of a husband who calls your financial privacy cagey, once you see it, there is no version of yourself that can unsee it. They wanted me smaller. They wanted me grateful for the corner of my own life they were willing to leave me. They had been planning for that version of events for longer than I knew. What they hadn't planned for was that the corner they left me was enough to rebuild from. I didn't destroy them. I simply stopped subsidizing a version of my life that was never meant to last. That, it turned out, was the only thing that needed to happen. I keep coming back to the moment I read those emails, not the anger, the clarity. That cold, settling feeling of finally seeing the full shape of something you had been living inside without realizing it had walls. What strikes me now is how long I had confused accommodation with kindness. I told myself I was being patient, being generous, being the kind of person who doesn't make scenes over things that can be worked out. And some of that was true, but some of it was also just fear. Fear of the conflict, fear of being called difficult, fear of the version of myself that would emerge if I stopped making myself small enough to fit the space they were leaving me. The thing about integrity, real integrity, not the performed kind, is that it doesn't announce itself. It just shows up in the small decisions, the ones no one is watching. When I chose not to confront them at the dinner party, that wasn't weakness. I had made a decision about what kind of evidence I needed and what kind of position I wanted to be in when I acted. That's not passivity. That's the kind of clear-eyed thinking that my work has always demanded of me, applied finally to my own life. I think about Vivienne, about myself, that earlier version, standing in her own kitchen feeling like a guest. And I think about what it takes to pull yourself out of that kind of slow erasure. It isn't one dramatic moment. It's a series of quiet choices that require you to trust your own judgment over the noise of everyone telling you that you're the one being unreasonable. What I had to find, what I think anyone in that situation has to find, is the difference between what you owe the people in your life and what you owe yourself. We're taught, a lot of us, that those two things are in tension, that caring for yourself is somehow a subtraction from caring for others. I don't believe that anymore. The version of me that was shrinking into the corner of her own house wasn't helping anyone. She was just disappearing. There's something about building things for a living that shapes how I see this. A structure that looks solid from the outside can be failing from the inside, and the longer you leave it, the more damage accumulates in places you can't see. The work isn't to preserve the structure at any cost. The work is to be honest about what's actually holding and what isn't, and to act on that honestly rather than on the version of things you wish were true. I don't think of what happened as revenge. I think of it as recalibration. I stopped subsidizing a situation that was costing me more than I could afford to pay, not just financially, though that was real, but in the daily erosion of feeling at home in my own life. My friend was right. My mother was right. My lawyer was right in her precise and unsentimental way. And my father, who taught me to keep my receipts in labeled folders, was right in a way he never had the chance to know. The house I live in now is smaller. The rooms are quieter. Every choice in it is mine. That turned out to be exactly enough.